Chapter 7. The Use of Spiritual Power. When you accomplish something that is remarkable or unusual through the use of spiritual power, do not permit yourself to think or say that you were the author of this work. In truth, do not consider yourself in any form or manner as having done what was seemingly been done by you. Keep the single eye upon the source of the power with which this great work was performed, and give all honor and glory to the supreme author of all that is great and wonderful in the world. When we consider the great truth, that he who exalts himself shall be humbled, that he who humbles himself before the Most High shall be exalted, we are dealing with one of the greatest of laws in the spiritual kingdom. And when we understand this law, we shall know the inner secret of the seers and the prophets, and of all the spiritual giants that have appeared upon any planet in the cosmos. There is but one source of true spiritual power, and that source is the infinite. But the man who exalts himself does not look to the infinite for his power. He looks to his own mind and soul. But here we must remember that although the human soul can give expression to marvelous power, still all of that power must come from the Supreme. And no one can receive power from the Supreme unless the eye is single upon the Supreme throughout the period of conscious existence. We receive from the Source only when we think constantly of the Source, and an open mind and soul to the divine influx from on high. When we humble ourselves before God, we do not depreciate our own worth. We still know that we were created in His image, and we realize most keenly that we are forever one with God. But we recognize the great truth that all power comes from above, and that God is the source of everything that is real and true in life. We do not exalt ourselves and say, "I have power of my own. I can depend upon myself." Nor do we think of ourselves as poor, insignificant creatures. For how can the noblest creation of the Supreme be insignificant? In truth, how can those creations be otherwise than wonderful? They are indeed wonderful, far more wonderful than we have ever dreamed. This we realize perfectly, but in the midst of this realization, we know that all power comes from God, and that we receive from God only as we depend absolutely upon Him for all things we may need or desire. When you exalt yourself, you do not depend upon God, you do not look to God, you turn away from Him, and therefore disconnect yourself from the only source of power. The result will be that you will steadily decrease until you are poverty-stricken in body, mind, and soul. Then you shall have to begin once more on the upward path, and from the very beginning. But when you look to God for all your power, you enter into a more perfect harmony with His Spirit and His life. In brief, you draw nearer and nearer to God, and in consequence you become filled more and more with His power until you become a giant in mind and soul. The very moment you draw nearer to God, you begin to increase, and the nearer you come to Him, the more power you receive. Thus we understand why they who have exalted themselves have been humbled, while they who have humbled themselves before the Most High have continued to rise higher and higher, finally becoming joint heirs with Christ in all power and glory of the kingdom. There is one thing herewith that we must positively understand, and it is this, that we cannot receive power from the Supreme unless we fix the whole of heart and mind and soul upon the Supreme. But the moment we think of ourselves as having the power, or as doing the work, we transfer attention from the Supreme to our own personality. Then we no longer receive power from above, and will soon begin to weaken. This we all realize, for how can we be in touch with the Source after we have turned away from the Source? And how can we receive more and more from the Source unless we draw nearer and nearer to the Source? Absolute oneness with God is necessary if we are to gain possession of remarkable spiritual power. And this oneness we can all realize if we look to God for everything and depend upon Him for everything in the faith that all our prayers will be answered within a single exception whatsoever. But the moment we begin to think of ourselves as sufficient, we turn away, we separate ourselves to a degree from the infinite. The open door between our own soul and the world of spiritual power begins to close in more and more. And if we continue in our self-sufficiency, the door will close almost entirely upon the light and power of the Spirit is, for the time being, shut out from our world. Your own personality may be the channel for the expression of marvelous spiritual power, but never say that, "This is my work," and never think that you are the author. Your work is to seek oneness with God. The power will follow. And it is the power of the Most High, living and working in you, that is the author of that wonderful work that seemingly comes from your mind and soul. This truth we must know. This truth we must realize more and more perfectly. And the more perfect the realization of this truth becomes, the deeper will become our realization of oneness with God. More and more will follow. Gradually and surely we will rise towards the sublime spiritual heights. The riches of the kingdom will come into our world in greater and greater measure. And whenever we are prepared to receive our full inheritance, then everything that heart and mind and soul may desire shall become our own. All things belong to God, but we are the heirs, and our full inheritance is ready for us to enjoy whenever we are fully prepared to receive. And when we are willing to depend upon God for everything, then we are prepared to receive everything that God has to give. End of chapter.